Good afternoon, students. I hope you all are doing good and I hope your preparation is going fine. Welcome to today's Analyst. This is 13th of August 2023 and we are here to discuss important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. So let us see the table of contents. The first topic is pertaining to your India-China border issues. It's there in the Indian Express, page number 1. Second important topic is related to Indian economy concerning our curb on imports of laptops, PCs and tablets. Third topic is related to tuberculosis and nutrition pertaining to the interdependence between the two. Third topic is related to the crisis of displacement. And fourth topic is your foreign exchange reserves. So all these topics are very, very important for your UPSC Civil Services examination, both from mains and prelims exams perspective. Now coming to the first topic of today, India and China are ready to hold border talks tomorrow ahead of our Prime Minister and the President of China's meet in the upcoming week. Now, why it is important for us? For our GS paper 2, India and its neighborhood relations, this India-China border issues and border disputes becomes very, very important. Now, context we already know, but what we have to know right now is that what this border dispute is all about. So let us start with the topic. Now, first of all, let us see what all are the areas of conflict between India and China and in what all sectors India and China are having contention in their borders. See, firstly, the border between India and China has been divided into three sectors. One is the western sector, one is the central sector, and one is the eastern sector, right? So in western sector, Ladakh range or this area is the area where there is border dispute between India and China. Now, if we see the Ladakh area here in this diagram, all these areas includes your Dame Chok, includes your Trig Heights, includes your Pangong So, it includes your Chumar. All these areas are the areas of border disputes between India and China in this western sector. If we talk about the central sector, this is the least controversial area, right? But still, if we talk about our Himachal Pradesh, which includes Korek, Shipkila, it includes also your Uttarakhand, Barahoti and Pulansunda. So all these areas are also the areas where India and China border disputes exist. But the majority of the border disputes are in relation to your Arunachal Pradesh. That is the eastern sector. Here China claims a lot of the part or majority of the part of Arunachal Pradesh. And in all these areas mentioned here, the border dispute between India and China is there. Because China is claiming a large part of India's sovereign territory, which makes this issue a very, very serious one and a very, very contentious one where India is not having any way out or India is not having any solution to it because China is claiming a sovereign land and obviously Arunachal Pradesh is an integral part of our country, so we in no way would be bending down to the demands of China, right? Because of which confrontation has been ongoing between India and China. Now there are three C's which has been controlling the relations between India and China. One is that of conflict, one is that of cooperation in certain economic spheres, and one is that of competition. Because both of the countries are developing and both of the countries are rising in the chart of economic growth. So there is conflict between both the countries, there is cooperation in some areas and also there is competition. So if we talk about one of the border standoff which happened, it was related to the Doklam standoff, which happened in this area near Sikkim, where Indian army and the Chinese army were on a standoff in the Doklam area. It's a tri-junction area between Bhutan, India and China. And also this Galwan Valley clash happened in this western sector in the area of Ladakh. So in this Galwan Valley clash also, many of the Indian soldiers lost their life. And it was also against the army of China. So because of these issues, the recent issues, because of these border tensions, the relation between China and India have become very, very sore. And China is also having a string of pearls strategy, whereby areas in and around the Indian Ocean region, which is surrounding the Indian country, which is surrounding our country, China is trying to induce their dominance. China is also trying to increase their military capabilities in a form of a pearl against around the country of India, which in turn reflects its strategy to reinforce their dominance in the Indo-Pacific region. So their string of pearls strategy is also one of the strategy which is concerning India. Now, if we talk about the causes of the conflict, that why India and China are in so much rivalry, what are the causes of the conflict between India and China, there would be these many conflicts. First is obviously the border disputes, which we already discussed. But alongside border disputes, China's proximity with Pakistan has been very, very close recently. So China has become a very close economic and defense partner of Pakistan. With Pakistan, we are having terrorism related issues since 1947. So because of that, there is growing conflict between India and China. Plus, there is huge power gap as well, because China is a permanent member of UN Security Council. In some aspect, defense capabilities of China seems to be superior, right? So because of this power gap, there is growing tension between them, plus huge trade deficit. That is, the amount of products which we import from China is very much high as compared to the products which we export to China. So because of huge trade deficit with China, we are having a conflict with China. Also, China's dominance in the Indo-Pacific region, whether be it in the islands of Japan, whether be it in any area of the Indo-Pacific region or South China Sea, China has left no stone unturned to ensure its dominance in the area. Right? It has been cooperating. Its debt trap diplomacy is also famous among the countries concerning your Indo-Pacific region. Because of that also, because of China not ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific region, it is a bone of contention between India and China. Because what India wants a free, open, inclusive, and a very, very, I would say, a very, very holistic Indo-Pacific region, right? But China is totally opposite to it. China is totally opposite to the idea of this Indo-Pacific which India is having, which is why there is growing conflict between India and China. Plus your Belt and Road Initiative, right? Now, Belt and Road Initiative, one of the projects in this Belt and Road Initiative, that is your China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It passes through the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, which India considers as a very integral part of our country. Which is why this is a direct attack on the sovereignty of our country and territorial integrity of our country. Which is why, again, there is a growing conflict between India and China. Plus your UN Security Council in relation to that as well, because China is opposing the permanent membership of India into the UN Security Council. So that also becomes a bone of contention, and several infrastructural projects which are being done or which are being projected by China in the contentious border area between India and China. So in those border areas, several infrastructure projects of China are being ongoing. Again, which is a cause of concern for India, because that border area is disputed between both the countries, right? Now, what our focus should be in this scenario is that what should be the way forward? And what should be the solution to the problem which has been arising between India and China? First is obviously that we need to ensure mutual respect between both the countries. So mutual respect, sensitivity and interests of both the countries needs to be taken into consideration. Only then an amicable solution can be achieved. We need to focus on the Wuhan spirit, the issues and the principles which arose between India and China in relation to Wuhan spirit. We need to enforce that these spirit is taken care of and it is upholded. Plus, we need to tackle international issues collectively, for example, Ukraine-Russia crisis. So we can collaborate on those international issues as well, and we can have our voices heard in the whole world. So we need to have deliberations. We need to have ongoing talks, which have been ongoing and which will be happening in the next week as well. So we need to have deliberation, we need to have talks, we need to have regular meetings of the officials of both the countries. Plus, there is one area where both the countries can cooperate, that is manufacturing cooperation. Now, we all know China is having a competitive advantage in manufacturing industry, but still, India and China can cooperate in manufacturing area where it can be, their relations can be leveraged. We can also revive SARC as well, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, right? We can revive SARC as well, in order to ensure that China and India's proximity becomes closer, and competitive coexistence. That is, we compete with each other, but we also coexist with each other. That should be the spirit between India and China in order to ensure that peace in the neighborhood is ensured, right? So this is related to India-China border disputes and a broad overview of India-China relations as well. Right. Coming to the second topic of today, the government introducing import ban, or let's say curb on imports on specific gadgets. Now, why it is important? Again, for a GS paper 3, Indian economy and issues relating to it is mentioned there. So in relation to that, import curbs becomes very important for our Indian economy. Now, what is the current context? Because government has recently called for import curbs or import licensing, as we would say, on laptops, tablets, and PCs, that is personal computers. Now we need to understand what is an import curb. So when we reduce the number of imports using various restrictions, let's say licensing, or let's say increase in tariffs, increase in various taxes, in that scenario we call it as a import curb. That is, we are curbing our imports, we are reducing the level of our imports. Okay. Now we need to understand that recently the action of Indian government to curb the imports on laptops, PCs and tablets, why it was made. So first reason obviously is that we want to ensure Atmanirbhar Bharat. That is, we want to ensure that we are self-dependent and we reduce our import dependence in order to become Atmanirbhar Bharat. That is, we do not import all the products. Rather, we boost our domestic manufacturing capabilities and become Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? So, boosting our domestic manufacturing, it is also one of the reason. Plus, China factor is also there, because if you see this image, you would see that most of the proportion of our imports, electronic goods imports, is coming from China. This red area here indicates the import of China vis-a-vis compared to the whole imports of electronics by our country, which again shows that from China we are importing more than 50% of the electronic goods of our overall import of electronic goods, right? Which shows that we are heavily dependent on China for electronic goods. So in order to curb that and in order to ensure domestic manufacturing, so this, because of this China factor as well, we are imposing curbs on our imports. Plus security factor as well, because if we are importing a lot of products from, let's say China, or let's say some other countries, which can have a threat on our security as well, because if the products like laptop, like PCs, like tablets are coming from China, country like China into our country, maybe there would be a certain chip installed, maybe our data can be assessed by them, can be accessed by them, right? So if it can be accessed by them, it leads to the breach of our data privacy. And it also leads to leakage of various security information and personal information to a third country, which again tells us that we need to be secure. So security factor is also one of the reason because of this, because of which import curve have been there. Now sensitive data also, because we do not want to compromise our sensitive data, because of that also this import curve is happening. Now what is the implication of this? So implication is very, very clear. Now we would not be able to import laptops, PCs and tablets, or if we are importing it, we need a license, right? So when this kind of restriction is imposed, obviously the domestic prices of the electronic goods are bound to increase. So in economic sense, purely economic sense, if we say, the domestic prices are bound to increase of electronic goods. So increased prices we can see, and bureaucratic discretion, because whenever we import licensing, the role of bureaucrats come into play, right? So increased bureaucratic discretion would be visible in the importation of these electronic goods. So this can be the potential implication of this import curbs which have been imposed on laptops, PCs and tablets. Now coming to the third topic of today, it is related to the interdependence between TB and nutrition. Now why it is important for our GS paper 2, issues related to development and management of social sector and services relating to healthcare have been mentioned. And TB and malnutrition are a very important part of our healthcare, right? And also issues related to poverty and hunger have been mentioned in the social justice part, which is why it becomes important. Now coming to the current context, a recent report in The Lancet, which is a very prominent journal, says that nutritional support has helped to prevent tuberculosis and also the mortality among the TB patients. So because of which we will be studying the interrelation and interdependence between nutrition and tuberculosis. So what first question is, what is TB and what is tuberculosis? See, TB is a bacterial infectious disease which is primarily affecting our lungs. So the disease which primarily affects our lungs and is a bacterial infectious disease is what we call as tuberculosis. But what we need to understand here is that what is this synergistic relationship between tuberculosis and nutrition? Now, according to a report by World Health Organization, 40% of the TB patients, that is the people who are suffering from TB, they are also suffering from malnutrition. That is, nutrition in their body is not at the optimum level. That is, they are not being provided the proper and optimal level of nutrition, right? So there is a very high correlation and a very high interdependence between tuberculosis and nutrition, right? Now we need to understand what are the important risk factors for TB. And among all the risk factors, first risk factor is your undernourishment. So if nourishment to your body is not properly provided, it can become a risk factor or a cause for TB. Plus your HIV infection, it is also a risk factor for TB. Then high consumption of alcohol, then smoking habits and diabetes. All these are the risk factors for your TB. But among all, undernourishment is the prominent one, which again tells us that interrelation is very, very high. Now, if a person is malnourished, if a person is not getting the right level of nutrition, first of all, it weakens their immune system. And when immune system gets weakened, ultimately the chances of TB bacteria affecting our lungs becomes very, very high. Because of which, the incidence of mortality can also happen. That is, people can die because of tuberculosis if they also suffer from malnutrition. So providing right kind of nutrition, providing right kind of nutrients to a person's body is very, very essential. Now, this malnutrition also leads to wasting. It also leads to stunting. It also decreases our muscle mass, because of which it also affects our lung functioning, right? And if it is affecting our lung functioning, it is making our lungs weak. It can be easier for the bacterial infection related to tuberculosis to enter into our lungs and to affect our lungs. So again, a very high correlation between a malnourished person and the incidence of tuberculosis, which is why again we need to ensure proper nourishment. Now, let's see how TB is impacting the nourishment levels or the malnourishment levels, right? Now, if a person, let's suppose, is having tuberculosis, right? Ultimately, what will be the effect of it? The person would be suffering from weight loss. The person would be suffering from appetite loss. The person would be having a metabolic change. Because of this, there would be low nutrient absorption in the body. So even though nutrient is entering, but it is not being absorbed by the tissues of our body. Now, because of low nutrition absorption, there will be the problem of malnourishment. Right? So because of tuberculosis also, malnourishment can happen. And because of TB, there can be anorexia, because of which weight loss can be there, and it can make a person weak, and it can also make our immune system very, very weakened, again leading to high incidence of tuberculosis. So my point in telling you all these things is that in order to ensure that the rate of TB comes down, we need to ensure proper and a very, very specific nutrition or specific nutritional diets to the people, and especially to the rural people, and especially to children, women and elders. So in the marginalized section, we need to ensure proper nutrition is provided to them. Because if proper nutrition is not provided, there are high chances of those people getting the risk of tuberculosis. Right? I hope you understand. Now, relationship between undernutrition and any kind of infection. Firstly, because of infection, there would be inadequate dietary intake. Or let's say if you are not having a very proper dietary intake, so there would be inadequate dietary intake. Ultimately, if you're not having proper diet, proper nutrition, it will lead to weight loss, right? It will lead to faltering of the growth. Ultimately, it will cause lowered immunity, and it will lead to mucosal damage. Because of all of these factors, the incidence of disease increases. So because of this, the incidence of disease increases, the severity of disease increases, and the duration of disease also increases. Now, let's say if you are not having proper diet and all these things are happening as well, and then we are catching up with the disease, we are having an infection. Ultimately, because of that infection, we will have appetite loss, we will have a nutrient loss, we will feel nausea, we will have dizziness, nutrient malabsorption will be there, and impaired metabolism would be there. Now, because of again all these factors, we would be coming to the same stage where our dietary habits or the nutrient intake would be minimal. Because in turn of these reasons, ultimately whatever food we take, we will not be able to absorb the nutrients, right? Because we are having a disease, we are having an infection. So again, this cycle continues, which again tells you that a vicious cycle develops if you are not having our nutrients properly. So because of malnourishment, because of undernourishment, the incidence of any kind of infection affecting us, it increases. I hope it is very clear to all of you. Now coming to another topic which is related to your crisis of displacement. Now why this displacement topic is important for us? For our GS paper 1, where population and associated issues, poverty and developmental issues, and issues pertaining to our urbanization are mentioned. In this respect, this displacement and crisis related to it becomes important. Now, what is the current context? The residents of Yamuna Khadar have faced a double displacement in few weeks. First displacement, obviously they suffered because of the floods. Second displacement, when they are forced to go out from the shelters being provided to them. So double displacement has been faced by, I would say, 4,000 odd residents of this Yamuna Khadar area. In few weeks it is happening. Right? Now we need to understand the first question, what is displacement? Now whenever you are forcibly made to move out of your home or home premises, and you are forced to live at some other place because of various external or internal reasons, it is known as displacement. Now it can be because of a disaster, it can be of there can be variety of causes of displacement. But whenever you are displaced from your home and forced to live at somewhere other than your home, that is what you call as displacement. Right? Now, what are the multifaceted causes of displacement? First is obviously your climate and natural disaster. For example, the recent floods which happened. So flooding is one of the cause. Then if a earthquake happens, if tsunami strikes an area, so because of various climatic and natural disasters, displacement can happen, right? Because of man-made disasters as well, like your COVID-19. Because of COVID-19 as well, the human-animal conflict, because of that as well, displacement can happen. And there can also happen displacement because of conflicts and turmoil in various areas, which can include your between the confrontations or conflicts between various ethnic groups, the confrontation and conflicts between various other social groupings. If that is there, ultimately displacement can be a root cause of that. Let's see this infographic over here, which again says that forcibly displaced people worldwide, it has been close to 108.4 million people who have been forcibly displaced as a result of persecution, as a result of conflict and violence and human rights violation. So close to 35.3 million people are refugees under your mandate of UN agencies. Close to 62.5 million people have been internally displaced. Close to 5.4 million people are asylum seekers. Close to 5.2 million people are the people in need of international protection. And there is also a data that if we combine all the people who have been forcibly displaced and we form a country, that country would be the 14th most populous country in the whole world, which again shows us the magnitude of the number of people being displaced from their homes every year because of variety of causes. So this is what you call as forced displacement, and it can also happen during the time of wars. For example, it happened during the time of World War I as well, World War II as well. It is happening in the current Russia-Ukraine war as well. Displacement of lakhs and crores of people is happening in Russia and Ukraine. So that is also one of the multifaceted cause because of which displacement happens. And this displacement turns into a crisis, and how it turns into a crisis we would be seeing. In order to understand the impact of displacement, we need to understand that the burden of this displacement is mostly borne by your poor and underprivileged people. Because rich people can afford new houses, rich people can afford new places, so normally they are not displaced, right? The real burden of displacement is to be borne by the poor. So because of displacement, first of all, poverty burden on the already poor people, it increases. So the incidence of poverty in any economy, if displacement happens at mass, it increases, right? So there is a problem of life and livelihood as well, because if you get displaced, if you go to another city or if you go to another town, then the job and the life and the livelihood, how you earned, it also gets very much affected. Then there are several cultural problems as well, because let's say if you are displaced to another region where the culture is totally different and you are not able to practice your culture, or if you are not able to acclimatize to those situations, then that is also a social problem which happens because of this displacement. Now there can be the problem of hunger, malnutrition. It can be increased, it can be fueled even further because of the displacement, because loss of livelihood is there. And because of loss of livelihood, if money is not there, it will lead to the problem of malnutrition and hunger. Scattered kinship. Now, if during the time of natural disasters, when whole of the family gets scattered, some people go somewhere else, some people go somewhere else because of the displacement which happens, because of the chaos which gets created. Because of that, scattered kinship is one of the impact which we can see. Another impact is the assimilation problems which we have. So if people are displaced from one place to another, where culture is different, society is different, food is very different, the way of living, the standard of living is very different, ultimately it will lead to assimilation problems. That people would not be able to assimilate with that locality, with that area. And because of assimilation problems, if they are not able to assimilate, some people among them, some proportion of the population will go towards crime. Why? Because they will face the issue of marginalization. So if some section of the population gets marginalized, ultimately it will lead to the issue of deviance. That is, they might deviate from the social norms, they might deviate from the public order and ultimately resort to criminal activities. Right? Because not everyone is born criminal. Because of these activities only, when assimilation problems arises, because of that marginalization takes place. And because of marginalization, your deviance happens. That is, you deviate from the social order, the public law and order. Because of that deviance, crime happens. So there can be increase in incidence of crime as well because of this crisis of displacement. I hope this is very clear to all of you. Now coming to the last topic of today, it is related to your foreign exchange reserves. Now forex reserves has recently dropped $2.42 billion, and it is now close to 601.45 billion as of your 4th of August. So as of 4th of August, our foreign exchange reserves stand at $601.45 billion. Why it is important for our GS paper 3, again Indian economy, this foreign exchange reserves becomes important. So the context we already know, that our foreign exchange reserves are now close to $600 billion as of August 2023. But we need to understand what are foreign exchange reserves. So foreign exchange reserves are the foreign currency assets of any country which they have kept as reserves. For example, India, if India is keeping the dollars, the yen, the pound sterling, or the renminbi, or any of the currency as reserves in their central bank in order to use it further for various transactions or various purposes, that kind of reserve of foreign currency which is maintained by a country is known as foreign exchange reserves. Now what you need to understand, now once you know what is foreign exchange reserves, many of you might be thinking that foreign exchange reserves only consists of foreign currencies. But that is not really the case. Why? Because foreign exchange reserves includes 4 kind of things. It includes your foreign currency assets, which includes your dollar, your yen, Japanese yen, your pound, your pound sterling, your renminbi. All those currencies are included in foreign exchange reserves. But other than that, the gold reserves which we are having are also accounted in our forex reserves only. Plus the special drawing rights which we have with the International Monetary Fund, that is also a part of our foreign exchange reserves. Plus the reserves position which we are having with the International Monetary Fund, that is the reserve tranche which we are having, that is also a part of the foreign exchange reserve. So all these cumulatively they form the part of forex reserves, not the foreign currency alone. Right? So there are 4 parts to forex reserves. Now why this forex reserves and maintenance of it is very significant. First is obviously for your transactional purposes. During our exports and imports, we use these foreign exchange reserves. So for our transactional purposes, it becomes important. Then in order to maintain our exchange rate, because most of our exchange rate is based on the demand and supply of our currency, but we can also influence our exchange rate or stabilize our exchange rate using the foreign reserves which we are having. And a strong hold of foreign exchange reserves also gives confidence to investors as well. So in order to ensure investors' confidence into the country, foreign exchange reserves needs to be high, and also to prevent any future crisis from happening. So in order to prevent crisis, which pertinently includes your balance of payment crisis, so in order to prevent BOP crisis in any form, which basically happened in your 1991, so in order to prevent a situation like 1991, maintaining high level of foreign exchange reserves becomes paramount. Now let us see the trend of foreign exchange reserves in all these years. If I tell you the latest number, it is close to $601 billion as of August 2023. But let us see what has been the trend. So in this diagram, you see that from financial year 2012 to financial year 2023, our foreign exchange reserves have substantially increased. Right? So there is a substantial rise in the level of foreign exchange reserves in our country. Now, during the time of COVID as well, or during the lockdown as well, our foreign exchange reserves skyrocketed. And during the financial year of 2022, it also surpassed your $617 billion as well. Right? And if we see this latest chart, again it shows that in the month of July, there were many times when our foreign exchange reserves also touched your $610 billion mark. Right? So now our foreign exchange reserves are hovering around 600 or 580, 590, 550 to 600. That is the range between our foreign exchange reserves hovering around. And somewhat more than your 600, which can include your $605 billion, $610 billion as well. So this has been the trend in relation to foreign exchange reserves. Right? If we see in 2012, it was close to $294 billion. In 2013, it was close to $292 billion. So earlier it was close to $300 billion, right? But now it has almost doubled, right? So in the last 10 years, we have seen the foreign exchange reserves of India being doubled. So this is the trend which we witnessed. Now this you should know in order to solve any kind of objective question or even the subjective question in a mains, you would be able to answer if you know this trend. So this is the end of today's session. I hope it was fruitful for you. All the very best and good luck for your preparation.